I'll call the meeting to order. I don't see any reason not to pledge allegiance since we have the flags on this room. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And a brief moment of silence as we generally. Thank you all. This meeting is being recorded by the recording clerk for record keeping and also by Mr. Gant. Would anyone else like to record the meeting? There being none, I will proceed. There's an attendance sheet there. Could we pass it around? That would be wonderful. We are here primarily this evening because our town treasurer, and accountant, and town administrator have brought forward two viable options for the imminent borrowing. So we appreciate not only doing that, but doing that on a timely manner, so we have a chance to give it some thought and give it some discussion. So that's why we're here. So I would call Barbara Lee. Hi.
Hi.
Would you give us a summary of your a very helpful and informative memo, but if you could kind of walk it through us. And
Sure,
I think
I
there's
will.
copies up there.
A few notes I'm going to read from. So previously we presented to the Board of Selectmen a bonding schedule that shows a $6 million band that matures in March 2019 and a $14 million band that matures in May. We plan to roll the $14 million band to November 2019, knowing the projects would not be fully completed at that time to bond the full amount. The $6 million band is just for the town hall, but the $14 million band involves both town projects, which affect the tax rate and water projects that affect the water rates. Each is about $7 million. Predicting the interest rate is not possible. However, when speaking to the financial advisor as of today, there's most likely not going to be an increase by March, but 2 rate hikes are expected to occur in 2019 calendar year. The Feds currently have a meeting scheduled for June and one for later in the year. I've tried to be very conservative in scheduling the bands and bonds based on the progress of the projects. So I've tried to be very conservative in scheduling the bands and the bonds based on the progress of the projects and taking into consideration the impact on the tax rate. However, given the information about the current trends in the economy, I'd like to make an adjustment to the bonding schedule based on the current market trends. By going with option 2, it will most likely save the town money in the long term. The drawback is that it will result in a higher tax bill in the next 2 years. As new permanent debt comes on and overlaps the town's debt from 2011-2012 until that fully matures in 2022. The savings in the long term could be between $200,000 and $300,000 in interest over the life of the loan. My plan would be to request debt service schedules designed to reduce the principal payments in the first couple of years as a way to moderate the impact to the taxpayer while still benefiting from a potentially lower interest rate. So our 2 options are, the first option that we initially came forward with was the $6 million for the town hall. It's going to roll into a bond in March. And there's a $14 million, 314,612, which is made up of several projects to roll to November, and then we would bond it in November. In that way, we would have actually our first principal interest payment would be in 2021. The second option, which we talked with the financial advisor, is to break the $14,314,612 into pieces. In that way, we carry forward a balance in these projects that aren't completed, but also taking advantage of the hopefully the interest rate in March. So that would make the bond in March $13,500,000, and the bond to roll over $6,814,612. There's a lot of issues involved in the thought process. And I think thinking it through for the long-term town plan and borrowing forward in the forward future, that it'll give us some control over the first couple of years to keep it down, and then we'll be able to put, if we have to have more projects in the future, it'll open up an avenue to do that too.
We've had a lot of discussions about the 14 million and whether it was possible to bond that in May when it came due. It became evident that the projects aren't going to be completed to bond the full amount. And then in talking to Lori, the advisor, she had suggested as an option the breaking them apart. The issue with that, well, one of the things that you'd have to consider is that we'd be paying a band interest and a bond interest for those 2 months. But some of that would be offset by investing the money until you'll have a, what is it?
Refunding.
Well, we'll have a refunding, but also we'll have the bond money sitting until, no, the actual bond money sitting until the band comes due. So we'd invest that at that time to offset some of those costs of the interest. But there is a slightly higher interest fees during that time. But there's also the issue of what's bank qualified, that under a $10 million bond, if it's, as long as it's less than 30 million in a year, it becomes bank qualified, which is just, it's another factor that kind of can give you a lower interest rate, makes it more attractive to the banks because they'll lower bond issues. In the first option, the 6 million is the bank qualified. In the second option, the 14 million, the 6 million, doing the 6 million later on becomes the bank qualified. So that's something that we're considering. And then the other issue is that we have, with both of these bond issues, either way, we'll have a meeting with S&P, and the idea would be to try to get them to increase our bond rating. We just did the financial policies, which is a huge plus, and according to our financial advisor, we were this close with those policies before in terms of knocking us into the AAA rating. She doesn't see a reason why they wouldn't give us a AAA rating, but it just might not have been enough time. So, it's all, there's a lot of risk involved either way, but we'll be attempting to go for a AAA rating in February for the March bond, and then either way, we'll be talking to them again for May and November for the rollover and for the bond.
Questions?
In many ways, option B is an opportunity to potentially lock in a lower interest rate on more money than option A would be if interest rates go up during the year, as you suggested, or Laura suggested.
They're indicating that they're going up by 25 basis points. So if it goes up in June 25, and then we could be looking at a difference of 50 basis points in that time period. So the difference would be, in terms of long-term interest, would be either 200,000 or 300,000 if it goes up. I mean, it's always, they may meet, and it might just be, till next time type meeting, or they could go up.
Also, if we bond something sooner, if we can bond it, and it makes sense to bond it sooner, like you said, some things we can't because they're not completed or whatever. But if we bond sooner, then totally there's less interest that we're paying, because if we pay interest on the 7.5 million that we would have otherwise brought in, we pay interest on that's essentially a throwaway, because you still have to pay the full thing. So there's another savings there, essentially, to start it sooner than later.
So in one thought, the 6 million is going to be bonded anyway for the town hall. So that is part of it. So
I'm sorry, if I said it wrong. I meant the 7.5 million is what I was referring to. You bring it in sooner, then you're not paying interest for 6 months, maybe, quote, 8 months, depending on what you look at. But that's money that, as far as the total project cost, the real project cost, would be just it's used, but it's a throwaway as far as value. You still have to go out and pay for the remaining, that 7.5 million from
Right.
November on, where if you start early, you get it done that much sooner. What are the alternatives to mitigate the tax effect of bringing this stuff in? And the main part of bringing it in is somewhat interest, but it's really the principal part that hits
So
us.
the one big option that we have is to structure the debt. So the first 2 years, we'll have a low principal payment, and which is what Lori's is projected to do. So in other words, in the first year, we might have a $35,000 principal payment instead of $100,000. In the second year, we might have a $50,000 principal payment. And then the third year, we'll go into the regular schedule.
Oh, is that presented in here?
No,
No,
Oh.
you don't have schedules in front.
So anyway, so she's suggesting an unusual mix in the bonds?
It's, yeah, it's a level debt structuring, which I guess we,
Equal payments
yeah,
instead of equal principal.
except for the first 2 years.
except for the first 2 years.
Where you pay even less.
We would
Pay
pay
less
less
in the
in
first
the
2 years.
Just in.
You mean
that-
we're gonna mix, the first two bonds would be
The first 2 payments.
equal payment, and the remaining would be equal principal?
Well, she can
No.
structure it so the first 2 years, we can pay a lower amount than we owe. And then the third year, we're going to be back on the regular schedule.
Okay.
It sounds like one of the attractive options or benefits that you're saying for option B is that if we get an increase in our rating, then the rates are lower.
It does affect the rate.
How much of an impact is that? What are we talking?
In terms of a rate of bond
Yeah.
rating change,
I think they were,
It's difficult to
It's not-
quantify that.
it's
but-
not a whole lot, but I don't think we really know. I watch the schedules that come from the bank, and they kind of can project what other towns are doing right now.
Yeah.
And if they have a AAA rating, what they're getting, but it's really difficult to kind of,
it may affect the premium too.
yeah. We also have been getting very large premiums.
Well, we just had a rating change a year ago, or a year and a half ago,
Right,
and I think that saved us about 1/4%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's what they had suggested early on is 1/4%. I forget what else we changed.
Because I was thinking, does that offset any added risk with the rates going up? But it sounds, well, it sounds close. If you might save a
it would.
quarter and the rates may be going up a half.
right. It's hard to predict.
Yeah,
That's,
that's,
it's an estimate of what we're,
And plus, it all really just depends on the day that we go to market.
Right.
And what our bids look like and
yeah, we don't,
how
I
the
mean, we're going to market
fluctuates.
March 8th, but we don't really know exactly. We're kind of projecting right now like 3.75, but that's,
the main reason we wanted to come and talk to you folks about it is because we've been on this course of, making sure that, working, borrowing in a timely manner in terms of the projects, and then also working to ensure that it wasn't a huge burden on the tax rate. We didn't expect the projects to be as far along as some of them are, and we expected a couple to be, we expected the school project to be completed, we thought it was gonna be done by the end of the summer, actually, but there's a lot of layover with that, but,
one of the issues with the school project is there's a 5% holdback on the reimbursement until they do the audit. And from what we're hearing is the audit can take up to 6 to 12 months to get completed. So that 5% is hard to project what that. So in other words, we've borrowed for the school, and what we're projecting is gonna be our part of it, part of the cost. But we really don't know exactly what the reimbursement is gonna be from the MSBA until that last check comes in. So,
Have you had any talk with the water department about when that's gonna be done?
yeah, he has got some issues in planting in the spring and some landscaping, and so it sounds like he's got a punch list that has to
the
come up.
plant's expected February to March.
Well, that's what I was getting at,
Yeah.
is that the treatment plant, I'm told, could conceivably be in operation by the middle of February.
Yeah.
But all the
Okay.
money from the bonding would not be spent at that point. They'll be doing landscaping in
Yeah.
May.
So even though the construction might be completed,
Yeah.
the plant might even be operational, but that doesn't mean that the project can be closed out yet for
Yeah,
purposes of
you're right.
bonding.
Do you have some numbers to give us a sense when we say this is going to be a little more expensive for the ratepayer, option B is, but overall we save 200 to 300,000? What does that mean, a little more expensive to the ratepayer? What would it be to the ratepayer in option A? What do we think it's going to be in option B?
Well, that's, the projection is more or less, this,
What does it mean per household?
Should we-
Something
for a
to-
household.
Let's make a
Yeah.
disclaimer first, that all of this is very hypothetical
So
and
right now,
not going to be
probably-
precise. But
With, I would say with option A, it's probably gonna be like 230. But I'm throwing these numbers out, because like I say, I don't have firm numbers.
230 annually added to the
Annually on
tax
top of
bill?
the tax bill.
for average, single-family tax bill.
Whereas if we just do the 6 million, it's probably gonna be like 164.
Is an option to just do the 6 million anywhere? It looks like
And
we've got bonds and bans and both.
A is just doing the 6 million.
Okay, and rolling over the ban, no interest paid,
Well,
or
that-
just interest
that-
paid?
Yeah, no, that's interest, so we're
Just
not,
interest.
the tax rate isn't being
Is not impacted there.
by the short-term interest.
Okay, so it was, I'm sorry, for the 6 million alone, it's like 160,
165. maybe.
165, okay. And in option B, we're talking 230?
Well, that was
That's for the total project.
for the total project.
And
This is just
so-
the 6 million, yeah.
Option B with the 13.5 million, we're looking more at 230?
Yeah, it might be a little higher than that. It might be more like 3.
Okay, so $135 difference.
Yeah, it's,
How
the
long,
impact is going to hit the tax bill at some point. I mean, as we're gradually, waning ourselves into this debt schedule.
well, part of this, I would imagine, ties into what you were doing about the projections and the capital planning, to
Right.
say, how much is coming down the pike? When is the best time to try to work this in,
Right.
so it's more of an even
Right.
hit to the tax bill? So have we looked at that to say, based upon what we see coming and what we have on the
After
plate
this
right
is-
now, what is the recommendation?
Yeah, with the plan that we currently are looking at, the principal and interest on the permanent debt would be about $1 million a year for about 15 years before it starts dropping down.
Do we see any other large projects coming on at certain points that lead you to say, better to go with option A or option B, so that that million stays?
This isn't affecting that in the long term. This is just for the next 2 years is what we're talking about in terms of these two options. So that's, what we're talking about options, the two options to bond right now do not affect what you're asking in terms of there's another long-term project.
We are
Does-
trying to compartmentalize the town hall project in the 6 million versus the higher. So it's either the lower bonded amount or the
Or the
higher
13.
one. So we're trying to segregate that intentionally, not to be misleading, but to try and compartmentalize that one decision. So we were looking at what's in the best interest of the town. We know that it's to mitigate tax impact, and we could defer it to a certain level. But we weren't aware of this other option, which is why we're coming before you. But we are trying to intentionally segregate the town hall debt from all of any other future projects that we may have. As of right now, we don't have any that are definite, such as I know that the fire station might be something that's on the long-term capital plan. But we, at this point in time, we're just trying to focus on the
Yeah.
next window, say the next 5 years, in particular the next 2 years, because that's when this debt service is going to hit the tax.
There's a lot of cost when you band and when you bond, more when you bond. And roughly 50,000 each time. So we knew we were having 2 bonds coming up and we didn't want to increase the number of bonds. That's why the option of bonding in May wasn't initially discussed. However, what a financial advisor brought to us is, there's a law in chapter 44 that because we have 2 bands within a 90-day period, we can bond a bigger amount early and use it to pay down the band and then keep moving forward. And that's basically what we're doing. It's a little bit confusing saying it this way, but we're still only doing 2 bond runs to keep the cost down.
So, in answer to your question in part, and as Kelly said, it's the next 2 years that we're concerned about because we have existing debt from 2011 and 2012 that are rolling off. So that will ease the load on taxes. And the question is, if we add this other debt, and because we need to do something, on top of that, it would create a certain bump in the taxes. And so I go back to the question that would say, what are ways in which we could mitigate the load, as you pointed out, we want to keep it somewhat level, mitigate the load on the tax-paying side, different for water department, but the tax-paying side. And I would offer this for discussion, and that is essentially that we would take free cash in fiscal year 20, and somewhat less in 21, assuming we have the free cash, but we generate free cash pretty standard rate. Apply that against taxes, more so than we would otherwise do. So that essentially without doing that, there would be a lump for those 2 years and then go back out, so to speak, because now you lose the bond payments that you would do for 2011, 2012, but you kind of make up that bump by taking it and using some free cash to do that. It's all, the taxpayer has to pay everything. On the other hand, we brought that debt in, so it's that much sooner that it will roll off later on out the line.
Is that anywhere that it's rolling off from 2010 and 11?
We know that.
And-
That's a
The
given
debt
because
schedule.
those are
Debt
existing.
matures.
That's good.
Do we have a schedule of that
Schedules.
anywhere?
Yes, it's on the website too,
I can
but we
get
can
that.
get that for you.
Okay, and how much is rolling off?
I think the last payment is $86,000 in 2022, 23.
But tying it back into, if we're anticipating a bump of 300 a year for the taxpayer, do we have 300 or 200 rolling off? How much is rolling
No,
off?
we're still increasing
Yeah, it's
the
still-
base of debt right now.
So is this net, or this is additional? I'm trying to figure out what you were saying. There's debt that's rolling off, and we're taking this 300 on. I don't know what the net is of that.
I understand. So order of magnitude though, if you, one of the ways of thinking about it, well, actually, is how much we're adding on to what we're doing. But it's really not because
Right,
the debt is not falling off as much.
so
I
we're,
think we have the
Only
next
Dr. Thomas.
What the FinCom has discussed several times, and in fact we did in the fiscal 19 budget, after we came to balance, we said, you know what? The debt service line increased from the previous year, let's apply extra free cash. Even though we didn't need to meet the levy limit, we applied extra free cash to soften the pain, to take the edge off that lump, and we've talked about as recently as last week. Not that we know free cash yet for this coming year, but we talked about we could do the same thing again if it's available to try to take the edge off. And if it makes a difference long-term, if we can mitigate the impact in the short term, then.
And you say long-term?
Yeah,
Meaning 20, 25 years of quarter point more or whatever on the interest rate. It's very long term.
$200,000 to $300,000 that we're.
Right.
yeah. So we've
So
talked about
FinCom's ahead
that
of us.
several times. Yeah, that's why Jay and I came tonight.
thank you for coming.
So you're recommending option B?
Yes, for the long term, it saves money.
Any other questions from select persons? Mr. Spencer, good to see you. Feeling better?
Yes.
Good to have you back.
Thanks.
One last chance for the moment. Select people? FinCom members?
So, I'll just say, when we talked a lot about this in the past few weeks and months, and the concern was, knowing there's a short-term hit to the customer, my regular job, to the town, and to the town members and tax. making sure that we are looking at what the net present value is, what is the value of every payment out 20 years, in 20 years is important. And I think that was something that, unfortunately, Barbara will have to deal with the counter for the coming year, regardless of what happens. But I think we felt that, as FinCom, that looking for the long-term, a decision that was long-term, and then how do you mitigate the short-term impact is more important than looking from, starting from the short-term and looking out. So it's the direction that we went. And Karen has looked at it and talking about free cash for this coming year. We don't know what it is. We can kind of go like this and say, similar to what you said, is that it's you know what last year was and the year before, and they've all been similar. So relatively so.
And we intentionally left a larger minimum reserve at the end of our fiscal 19 balancing, knowing that there was going to be a bump whichever way you bonded. And if I remember the numbers right and looked them up, while the last year of the 2011-2012 payments might be small, the year before that are bigger. So
Yes.
Lynn's question of you're telling me 300,000 versus 85,
Right.
but that's
Right.
probably not the fair comparison.
Right, you probably really need to, I'll show you the schedules and you get a visual of what.
It's not a crazy difference, I think. It's not as drastic.
In fact, I think 2011 drops off first.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And
It
then
says-
2012 drops off on 2000, so it's 21, 22, 21 and 22.
And then water is on a slightly different schedule.
We can't help the water bill in
Right.
terms of.
Right,
So
I
this
mean,
would
they can, maybe they have some funds, but we can mitigate the general tax bill to the extent there's free cash available.
Greg's not here, but I know that he's been working with the schedules and the rates, so I think he's got a pretty good handle on his side of the debt.
Yeah, he's planning on equal principle, so that, because he knows he's gonna have more projects coming down sooner than later.
I'll just note that to the board, at our next regular meeting, I'm planning to present the longer-term capital plan for the next 5 years, the outlook, with the capital budget requests. And along with that, based on tonight's decision, we'll be updating the long-term debt outlook, if you will, with the information from today's meeting. So by the next meeting, we'll have a good feel and picture before we start developing the FY20 budget, what all of this really looks like once we make this decision to move forward.
Lynn, somewhat in answer to your question, looking at our existing debt, not the water department, this is just the town debt, government debt, if you will. It's about, the debt service amount is about equal for 19 and 20, for this year and for next year. For the 21 and 22, they go down about 110,000 in 21 and about 125,000 in 22.
That's before you add this in.
That's before you add that in, if nothing, that's right, exactly. In a sense, that's the, yeah. So what we're starting with though is existing run rate is X amount, and that's the amount that's gonna fall off.
Do you generally have a number of households, if we have a dollar amount like that,
I'm sorry.
110,000?
I should finish the last one, and therefore, in FY '23, it'll go off by another 200,000. So 21 is 110, 22 is 125, and 23 is 200,000, roughly.
So that translates to divide by, I don't know, 3,000 households, how many do we have?
Yeah, it's not quite that simple, so, I mean, I can work up debt schedules, you know, with the tax impact.
It's based on the assessed valuation of, I can't even say this number, 1,346,000,000, and then it's also the average home of 599,950, which we get from the assessor.
There's basically like 2,500 properties.
Yes.
Give or
yes,
take.
right.
So if you want the average, just divide by
But it's just a different formula that they use when they,
Is the value
yeah.
of the homes. So-
Jay, did you have something?
Yeah, the last thing I'd say is, just in this whole thing, understand the hope from everyone's, and this is more cover for you all, we're all trying to predict the future, okay? The general thought process is interest rates are climbing, so you wanna do your loan as soon as possible before it climbs. There's also a general thought you hear from the Fed and others that we're coming up on a recession sometime in the next couple of years, which would imply then its rates would go back down. So this is, everyone's doing the best they can with what they know right now, which is the Fed last time stood up and said 2 interest rate hikes next year. It's not, I mean, a 50 basis point hike doesn't necessarily mean directly a 50 basis point hike in bond prices, but it generally parallels pretty flat, so. But if we, you know, God forbid something could happen and the Fed could go, you know what, oh, we're in trouble and rates could go down. And we would, all this would have been the wrong thing to do.
Just so you know.
But it's our best information now.
We're going to open it up for comments or questions from the public. I just ask you to please stay on topic. This meeting is a very specific scope and focus. So is there anyone who'd like to speak? Ms. Sherwood?
Sherwood, 29 Perkins Road. So I think I heard tonight that Barbara, I think you said the P&I is estimated around $1 million a year for this 20 million?
No, that's total debt.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, hold on.
No.
Well, that would dovetail with like, you know, when we were told that the town hall would be $650 a year in debt service. So I was just trying to see if that made any sense to what I heard.
So we have the bond of 2017 that was a $5 million bond. And so there's actually, then there's the 20 million that we're talking about right now, and then the 5 million as well.
Right, so under either of these options, you're dealing with 20 million in debt, right?
But right there, yes.
You're really only trying to decide how much is going permanent right now and how much is spread out on home.
Right.
But 20 million in debt, does that not translate to about $1 million additional debt service?
Well,
That's what I
we're
thought I heard.
structuring our debt right now.
Depending on how you structure it,
Number
but
of
give or
years.
take even the interest, just the interest alone would be at 3% or 600 grand or something. I mean, I don't know. I'm
You're in the
throwing numbers.
category. Yeah.
So I'm trying to relate it to the FinCom budget that we have now. It showed $1.1 million in debt service last year, $1.2 million this
This
year.
is one of the reasons we're talking about this right now.
So the question is, are we up to $2 million too, when we add this 20 million?
Yeah, the budget's different, because the budget includes the band interest as well. So you see an extra 300,000 to 400,000 for band interest payments right now.
So ban interest comes out of our
It com-
annual tax money, it's not added into the band.
Right.
Right.
Okay, which is good, you're not financing your interest. Okay, great. So when will we have a better number of this debt service? Dick's described what's rolling off. And, you know, to match up with these two proposals as best you can, I guess.
Once we bond the first part, once we go with the first part and get those numbers, we'll be able to tie into the second part and come up with some pretty decent numbers
So you have no frame in your mind as far as
end of February.
how much that, what would we call it, the debt whale? What the hike might be?
We do have estimates
Yeah.
on things that we're working with right now, but
$1.7 million, $1.8 million, $2
I
million?
don't, I couldn't tell you.
You don't have any,
This was conversation that happened
Yeah.
Thursday.
okay, so it's timely.
Yeah.
Great. And then the other thing is in regard to the free cash, we are rather late in certifying. But as I recall, we had about $1 million unspent, I believe, in the budget fiscal year
$1,000,001.
18.
Yeah.
$1,000,001, which is a huge number. I mean, it was 500,000 the year before. And also our excise tax, et cetera. I mean, we should be way up on free cash. So I think we need to kind of be open about what free cash is and where it should go. I mean, that's a big number.
It's not a
Not
savings
expensive.
account that grows. It starts with your undesignated fund balance, and it's redetermined every year.
Oh, yeah, I know that. We're
Yeah.
waiting to see the breakdown of that.
Right, and it's-
You said $1.1 million
There's
was
not a time
unused in
frame
the
on it.
fiscal year 18 budget, right?
$1 million, yes, yeah.
And I suspect some of it is interest that didn't get spent and. you
No,
know,
it's
that's-
okay.
that's
Does
still
anything
in
do
the
with
bank.
interest?
That's a
Yeah.
huge number of a $30 million budget. So it's good that we have all this extra money hanging around, but I think I would side with decant on, we really need to look hard and see what we do with it.
don't set it aside maybe for other capital projects, but let's deal with this debt. I mean, this is, you look at a 4 or 5%
The funny thing
increases to
with-
the taxpayer just on debt.
With free cash is when you go to any meeting that DOR is speaking, is the first thing they'll tell you is it's not free and it's not cash. So, you know, it's really, you know, like I said, it starts with your undesignated fund balance, and it is, you know, for a lack of a better way to explain it, but it is kind of like the sum of your money that's left over at the end of the year, but doesn't,
I call it the budget within the budget, because it's what you don't spend on your general budget, also those excise taxes which you may have underestimated, you know, I mean, it's, and I think it's something that needs to be understood.
yeah,
I agree.
it's complicated. There's not a full formula DOR even gives, they use it based on a lot of estimates, it has to do with tax title receivables, I mean,
Right, but I mean, we had 2,200,002 last year, and 750 was always the guideline, and you left it at 1,125,000 or something. I'm suspecting we'll be over 2 million too, so there's a lot of slush around, you know, I mean, it's taxpayer money in different forms, but I'm hoping that we see that too.
let's free up FinCom to make decisions about those,
Well, they need to know about it too,
and
they
then
need to see the whole picture.
Town meeting, yeah, make recommendations and then,
Right, only when they understand the full picture, so this is very important stuff, I appreciate that we got to this point, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to just, first, thank you very much.
We don't have a camera unfortunately, but if you could still step up a little. Oh, we do have a camera.
I was trying to
Sorry.
avoid it by sitting back there.
Yes, camera.
I just wanted to thank the team for the extra effort to go back and look and dig. If I understand, basically what we're doing is we're taking $7.5 million that was in the May banding and moving it to bond in March.
yes.
So that's what we're doing. We're moving $7.5 million to
Yes.
bond earlier.
Mhm.
And I just made a few calculations, it might be of help. I think it's a very good approach personally. What we do is, Chase said, we lock in the interest rate for effectively that 8 months. We'd be carrying the interest rate risk for an additional 8 months if we didn't do this. On $7.5 million, who knows where the interest rates are going, but I think most of us know that best practices said, the earlier you bond, the better. Don't gamble on interest rates. A couple of other costs here, some small. If we ban less, in other words, instead of the 14 million banding in May, we're going to be banding less because we're bonding some. The cost, it's not a service cost, what is it?
Issuance cost.
The issue cost. My guess was $14,000 saving there. And this was, Barbara, your numbers, thank you. So there's $14,000 saving there.
Essentially for the difference, for the 7.5 million, if you banded it, it would be
14
something in the
million
order of-
versus 6.5 million banding. One of the big numbers, Dick, as you mentioned, is we're gonna band and pay interest on $7.5 million less over 8 months, or 6 months.
Right, right.
That's pretty significant. That's well over $100,000 of interest if we use 2.5%. Did I explain that clearly?
No.
No, that's okay, I talk fast.
Aim for a first step.
The banding right now on number A
Yes,
was to ban $14 million.
right.
But with option B, we're gonna be banning less,
Right.
almost 6.5 million, because we're going to bond.
Right.
If you look at the issuance cost of 14 million band versus 6.5, you save $14,000. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's, you know, it's real money to us.
But we have been receiving premiums that have been paying all of our insurance
Oh, I
costs.
understand that, but the interest you won't have to pay.
Right.
The biggest cost, and I think is very significant, is interest rate risk avoidance. And that's one of the, we just don't know where they're going, but that could whack you. That's enough. Thanks. No, I appreciate it very much. I think it's a really creative, very good option
You
there.
already spoke, I'll recognize you a second
Yeah,
time.
just a quick question, yeah. Kelly, you mentioned the capital plan and all that. Is the 5-year forecast part of what's needed to go to triple A bonding?
No.
Because I know that's in the works, I'm not sure where it is, it is not? I seem to recall that was in the S&P.
Any other members of the public? No? Oh, we've got to go to 2/3 right there. Thank you all. Is there any, I know you're looking for direction, is there any formal vote needed tonight? That comes later, right?
There's not a formal vote needed.
You-
We're changing the course of action that we had previously presented, and we just wanted to make sure that people were on board and in agreement with these decisions, because we're basing them on market trends right now, which,
You need to go one way or the other over the next 6 weeks.
starting tomorrow.
No, starting
What's that?
tomorrow.
Yeah, no,
You have to make a decision. That's right.
It happens, it
I mean,
happens fast.
you need the information now, but it's all being put together, okay.
Yes,
But
yeah.
it-
But
You
I'll-
need to, so our consensus is very important.
Well, I don't
now.
think it's a consensus, it's too technical. So I'll entertain a motion to express our preference, the preference of the Board of Selectmen between option A and option
So moved.
I- Okay.
B. Do we have?
I think you said a preference.
Should
Yes.
I
I think
should
a
say
motion.
A or B.
I make a motion. I make a motion that we have a preference for option B.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion amongst the board? Thank you very much. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you,
Thank you everyone for their input, it's appreciated.
thank you.
Oh, we didn't take a vote? Before you leave, all those in favor?
Aye. I thought it was gonna be a
I thought that was
consensus.
coming up.
How was the vote?
Yes.
The motion to go home?
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
Yes.
My daughter just found out.
I can give you the
I
original.
can always just keep it.
You gave me the original.